Yeah, that's sort of the way that authoritarianism or despotism is also depicted by the liberal mind, I guess, right? Is this idea that like currently in China, everyone's mind is determined by Xi Jinping. How horrible. As opposed to here where we leave space for everyone's mind to exist without being raped by Lovelace. Even though we totally are, we just don't admit to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the national project every time, is that's really what it is. And the only standard that you can use to make comparisons in that sense is this comparison on a literary or imaginative plane between a literary project of China versus the literary project of America at the current time. Who's telling the better story? Who has the better vision or project that they're narrating? And it's China. That's all that matters. I don't care, but yeah.
That's what I think too. Yeah. I mean, this is what we just did on the latest Ghost Jail was my job was to write like the Chinese story of the future, and Falstaff's was to write the American story. And, I'm talking about peace and creating prosperity and like, but like the American story, as he writes, is like Thanos cock, nothing but Thanos cock for eternity, like nothing to fight against it, like, which is basically what we have, right? Like, what is the opposition now to the global planners, like the story of the CFR or something?
Yeah,
like nothing. That's the only story that Americans can tell
now.
Even like the Trump story, the QAnon story, these attempts to build alternative narratives, Bernie Sanders narrative, the Democratic Socialist narrative, this idea that this is a revolutionary time. And it's like, no. All of these narratives have failed and they've died in the face of the CFR and the story of just good old America doing as it always has done.
Yeah. I mean, just look at this is what Robinson Crusoe's about. What is he doing? He's building up the island, right? That's the whole point, is that he builds up the island and he builds all of his devices and structures and everything to develop the island. So it's about the physical, economic development of this island. You can read it as colonialist metaphor of we're developing the new world, but it also has this aspect of it where Robinson Crusoe is praying and he's having a spiritual development in conjunction with that's intimately connected. It's not separable thing for him, because at the same time, it's island. This physical development, his project, it's a manifestation of his spiritual, imaginative construction of character. It's the same process. So it's the narrative that he's narrating to himself through his prayers and meditations and his religious conversion. That's the same narrative undergirding his physical development of the island as a real estate project or something.
Yeah, obviously in Robinson Crusoe, the literary factor of building the island is just literally true, considering it's an island composed out of words in the story. It's not a real island. It doesn't really exist. But when you read it, it feels like it exists.
Yeah, so that's what makes it such a brilliant book, is it works on all these different levels, where at the same time as that it's presenting that to you, I mean, that then becomes the model for all the people who read the book for thinking about their own engagement in a general project of English colonialism.
This stuff comes even earlier with Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, I think, is the biggest, most important one, because it's about that sort of project in the first place. I mean, Nathaniel Hawthorne, writing more sardonically later, writes a sequel called The Celestial Railroad, where it's about technology and like creating the railway system to heaven, as opposed to yeah.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I never heard of this. That's amazing. That's so funny.
Yeah, right.
Just from the title alone, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people don't appreciate how much more important like that narrative as economists, etc. People take stories or writing stories or fiction, literature, these things as being kind of secondary or superfluous, but it's like the most fundamental thing in the world. Without the ability to tell stories, there's no human being. Like, that's all that we are, is the ability to tell stories to each other.
Oh yeah, and then it's like, even if you look at, to get metaphysical, at Kant and look at his apperception of consciousness, right? His transcendental apperception. What is a person? What is a consciousness beyond just a succession of moments in time, a succession of conscious states, perceptual states that are linked together in a linear temporal series? What is the structure that even connects those things into a coherent order? It's like, that's a narrative. I mean, that's the narrative that we tell to ourselves that structures these moments of awareness and moments of perception, leads to what you could call an illusion of central coherence or personality at the center of everything. All of this, everything is structured where all these moments are in this narrative of a single person.
Yeah, and the same way it is with every single story, which every single story is about how did we come to tell this story? How did this story come into existence so that I can then tell it to you? That's the end of every, or like a Bildungsroman, or ultimately every story is about the creation of itself as a story. I can't think of a single example that isn't the case. It's kind of a truism. It's just so obvious. This is something I remember way, way back in the day when realizing for the first time when my father asked me what happens in Catcher in the Rye, right? Because what Catcher in the Rye is really about is about the writing. Like you have Holden Caulfield at the beginning, at the end of the events in the novel, and he's writing his story about how he came to be in the position where he has to write his own life story. And that's like most of these, that's like how every self-narrativization works too. If I were to tell you like, who am I right now? Who am I? Who do I think I am? Who do I want you to think I am? The story is going to be about how I got to this exact position where I'm telling you this.
No, that's exactly my thinking about it too, because I sent you some stuff about politeness and about diary writing, but that's exactly where the novel is specifically coming from, is that it appropriates these forms of, the diary and the correspondence. And, it's through these forms that we construct our lives and and it's a very literal thing, right? When it comes to diary writing, because it ends up being advocated for by people like Joseph Addison and basically the Whigs and the promoters of polite society in the 18th century, is that they are telling people, you need to write a diary because it allows you to adjust your character as you would adjust your appearance in a mirror, right? Your diary is a mirror of your personality through which is a tool you use to construct yourself. And that's the whole point. And so that's why these forms become the basis for the novel. If you look at the early novel, if you look at Defoe, if you look at his Moll Flanders or Roxana, or a lot of these sentimental narratives, is literally what you just said. It's the narration of the self, and it's the story, how the story came to be told, and the person basically just constructing themselves through this narrative. And it's always in these forms of a confession or a memoir or autobiography or diary or correspondence. And that's, the novel just comes about through the amalgamation and picking and choosing between those different practical forms and using them for their literary potential.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the real problem that we have today in America anyway, is that we don't have a very inspiring story that we tell about American development anymore. No one really believes it anymore. This is like most of people's problems is why isn't the story of our lives that interesting or compelling anymore?
This is exactly the danger of hypostasis and of disconnecting yourself, your freedom, from the ability to narrate, because that leads you exactly to this position of fatalism and nihilism about your role in constructing the story, where it's not a story anymore, it's just reality, and you become blinded to it. You become blinded to its true nature, so you can't construct anything else, and you can't alter the construction or lead it into any different direction. And I think this is another point, is this is why the Congress of Cultural Freedom existed, right, in the 50s, is literally to do, what you just said. It's like, what?
Oh, absolutely. It was the most important thing they did. Like this, it's not like, like people are like, oh, like the narrativization, et cetera. Like this is kind of secondary to like the economic concerns or whatever. But it's like, no. Like you can't get away with all of this other shit unless you're telling a really good story, right? And this is something even people say now, like, I just watched South Park put out a thing, and they kind of put out like about it's like the vaccination special. But towards the end at one point, there's like a character who's like, I don't really care what the Hollywood elites were doing. Can I just get my old life back? And that's sort of the same thing with like, something like the JFK assassination or something like that, right? Like if the story of America is like compelling enough, like then we're going to look away and let all of these other things happen because like we don't want to disrupt like our immersion or like in the story of America.
Yeah, we want to go. That's what people mean when they say, I want to go back to normal or return to normalcy or anything like that. It's just like, I want to go back to enjoying the story, and I don't want to assume a critical role in it. I don't want to, it's like, it's like a very kind of passive form of enjoyment of just like, I want to watch the Marvel movie. I want to watch the superheroes. I want to watch Zack Snyder Justice League. Who cares if it's bad or whatever? It was okay.
Yeah. I don't want to be reminded of like plot holes.
Yeah.
You're taking me out of my willing suspension of disbelief in America when it seems like my life's getting worse. And like the president is on TV and I don't like what he's saying.
Yeah, and in the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they have these amazing crew of some of the most well-regarded authors and publishers of the middle of the 20th century. But then today, it's like there's nothing even close to that.
Yeah, it's a total rot of the ability to coordinate talent like this. It's just gone.
Yeah, so then now who tells the story anymore? It's just we've totally
Joss Whedon.
Yeah, we've outsourced it to just these hacks working in Hollywood. But that's why we need a return to literature or something. It's people need to retake their agency in this respect, realize their own participation in the construction of the story, and tell a new story that does something better.
I just don't think we have it in us anymore. Like I just think that ship has fucking sailed, man. I'm just buying up a bunch of Chinese novels and stuff like that because it just seems like they have a more interesting, like, you know, they're like far more hopeful and like optimistic about the future. They like believe in creating projects and like they're invested in their own, like the narrative of their own society. And I could see why. Like if you're a Chinese citizen right now and like you've gone through the 20th century, which is like fucking horrific, especially for China, and then you get to this point right now, like why wouldn't you be feeling like you know, compare like how they dealt with COVID or whatever to the rest of the world, or particularly to America. And it's like obviously like they're like inspired, like they believe in the story of the Chinese state, right? But like what American even believes in the story of the American state or something? Like it's all become such bullshit. Like this is like we have like the worst story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fucking sucks, and people are gonna stop buying it. Like
yeah, absolutely.
This whole Hollywood complex, like the whole CCF, like this whole pop cultural landscape is just dying. People are panicking about it. Literally, I saw a commercial yesterday for a relaunch of MacGyver and Magnum PI. If we have to relaunch this shit 12 million times, it's clear that we're running on fumes.
I'm not super hopeful about our ability to cope with that, because that's the whole problem with the cultural war discourse that you see online and everything, is that you know, it never leads to awareness or self-consciousness about any of the stuff that we're talking about. It's just a constant fight over just something that just gets shittier and shittier every day. Who gets to control this? Our huge propaganda machine. That's what it's all about. Who gets to control our huge propaganda machine that creates this narrative that everyone in the world follows? But they don't care at the same time that the quality of that is diminishing endlessly, so that nobody believes the story or cares about it anymore.
The fact that I haven't been given millions of dollars to create gigantic film projects like Stanley Kubrick or something is an indictment of America. So I totally agree. You know, like... That's what made America what it is in the first place, was the Council of Cultural Freedom, like pushing these gigantic cultural projects. This was what made America, when people think of the heights of America, or the good times. Yeah, this was a time period when you had mass market paperbacks of classic literature being pushed on the public and like all over the place. Everyone was picking them up.
The directing editor of Random House was literally part of the New York branch of the Congress of Cultural Freedom. He was on the American steering committee of it, right? It's like you don't even think about that anymore. But really, it's like where does the classic American library, what is it called? You know what I'm talking about? Where does that come from? It's like literally the CCF. It's like literally that's where it comes from. Is all that stuff is, you know, that was funded by the CCF to tell you know, Americans this story that they could believe in, but not anymore. I mean, now there's no projects anymore beyond just kind of fatalistic concession of the whole narrative process to just Disney. That's it. It's just like, who cares?
Yeah, that's it. Which, like, yeah, we just gave it to this corporation, and that's who's in charge now.
Imagineers, man. It's the Imagineers. They're the technocrats who are going to be able to do it. You know, we got to rely on their expertise, their Imagineering degrees.
Yeah. It's like we have the professional narrativizing class, right? They're not doing anything cutting edge or breaking ground on narrative or being that inspiring.
Or that's exactly the conceit of Pixar, right? And like whole Apple aesthetic of it. We've perfected making these movies. We've turned it into a science.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why we need to go back to the restoration. We need to go back to exactly what I was just saying about the proliferation of these societies. Where did our society go? Why do we not live in a society anymore? It's because all the basis for that, all these little societies, which is what a real society, that's what the word means. All those dried up, is that we don't do any of these kinds of organizations anymore.
That was sort of the gamble that was played in the 20th century as we liquidated the American archipelago of private societies to create the big society, and like Lyndon Johnson talking about the big society.